Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion on the future of casework. I'm Ann Meeker. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at the POPVOX Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that works to inform and empower people and make government work better for everyone. And especially relevant for today, I am also a former caseworker and former Director of Constituent Services. So I am so excited to have the chance to nerd out on all things casework and all things the power and the promise of what casework can be with all of you and with our fabulous panel today. So before we get started, I'm going to take the host's prerogative for a minute to introduce the folks joining us today and set the stage for how we got here and what we're hoping to come away with by the end of today's session. So in our audience today, we have two big groups of people who aren't always necessarily in the same place at the same time. So as a host, I feel like I have to make some introductions. I'm delighted to have caseworkers joining us, and then also people who've been involved in the Modernize Congress efforts that are, of course, always perpetual and ongoing, but have really been coordinated and coalesced with some momentum around the wonderful work of the House Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. So caseworkers, if you haven't been following ModCom, it's really worth catching up on all of the wonderful work that they've done, in particular, the hearings on district operations and on casework. We wouldn't be here today without the momentum and the energy that that committee's work generated. And we're so really excited to hear from two people who have played a central role in that work in a moment. But I'll just frame it as a former caseworker, part of what was so exciting about ModCom's work, beyond the tangible, specific things that will have an impact on casework, was the way the approach that ModCom took felt so familiar. Every ModCom hearing worked to surface problems around how Congress works, around the experience of working in Congress and doing the people's business, dug into what caused that problem, and then did the hard, imaginative work to ask, how could this be different? And that felt so familiar because that's what caseworkers do on behalf of their constituents every day. So today we want to build on that ModCom work and ask caseworkers to think like caseworkers, but on their own behalf for a change. So on our team, we often ask ourselves, how would it work if it were magic? So today we're going to ask that same question about casework. What would be possible for caseworkers who have a state-of-the-art, custom-built, transparent, accessible tech tools to manage their cases, to work with their constituents? What would it look like if those plugged into executive branch systems? What would casework look like if there were strong pipelines between casework expertise, observations, data directly into committee-level oversight and legislative action? What would casework look like with the support, the training to help their constituents and contribute to those larger forces without burning out, actually having the resources and the support to do that job resiliently? What would it look like if casework had the flex capacity, had the training, had the resources to proactively plan and be ready to coordinate in a moment of crisis instead of careening from one disaster to another? So today's speakers are going to help guide us through those different vectors for the vision for what casework can look like in the next decade and beyond. But let me also start by saying that none of that will be possible without the innovation and the vision that comes from caseworkers, from your experience in the field, in your office, for what you are doing to make casework work better for your constituents and your team. And this also won't be possible, modernization folks, without your continuing to champion modernization inclusive of district and casework staff. Caseworkers represent at least 18% of Congress's staff capacity on the House side alone, as well as a deep reserve of expertise, innovation, mission-driven work ethic that is a force to be reckoned with. What would Congress look like if we made the most of casework, is what we're here to talk about today. So this is going to be one of the few webinars where I will enthusiastically welcome this is more of a comment than a question, kind of question. So caseworkers, if you have ideas, if you have observations about what could be better, where do you think casework will go in the next 10 years, please get all of that ready, because that is what we want to hear from you today. So please feel free to drop those questions, comments into the Q&A, and we will have time at the end to have that discussion with our panel today. So diving in, none of that will be possible without serious leadership in Congress. And there is no one better to talk about that than our opening speaker today. So caseworkers, you may not know that you've had a home team champion working on your behalf in Congress for the last few years. So I am so excited to introduce Congressman Rodney Davis, who is the vice chair at the Committee on House Administration. For folks not familiar with what Committee on House Administration does, they oversee the day-to-day operations of the House, to include casework. And he represents Illinois' 13th district, and prior to being elected, he served as projects director for Congressman John Shimkus. So he is one of the few district staffers elected to Congress himself. So without further ado, Mr. Davis.
Hello, I'm Rodney Davis, and I serve as the ranking member on the Committee on House Administration. It is an honor to help kick off these discussions about doing one of the most vital jobs in every congressional office, being a caseworker. Let me start by saying thank you. Every one of you is an incredible public servant who is impacting the lives of our fellow Americans. For most constituents who contact their representative, you are the names and faces of how the House helps our constituents. You are the unsung heroes of every office, and from my very first days being a district staffer to my last days of serving as a member of Congress this year, I'm amazed by your resilience, your kindness, and your dedication to doing everything you can to help people. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Committee on House Administration, we oversee the multiple entities that support congressional offices and members on the day-to-day basis. Casework is central to the services that congressional offices offer to constituents, but often the tools, the resources, and the training for caseworkers, they really haven't been well developed to support each and every one of you. I hope that this program can set the stage for future conversations and encourage innovation so the House can better support each of you in your role as caseworkers. As the experts in your field, I encourage each of you to help all of us better understand what trials you face, the tools you would like to see developed, and the ideas you have for how we can leverage the stories that you come across every day to better inform policy and oversight decisions. Thanks for all the work you do on behalf of the American people, and thank you also for taking the time to attend this event.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Mr. Davis for joining us and for his leadership at CHA in the work as a member of ModCom. He leaves enormous shoes to fill when he leaves us at the end of this Congress. But diving into our panel today, as Mr. Davis mentioned, the caseworkers on this call are deeply, personally, intimately familiar with the places where the tools and support for casework has not necessarily lived up to our hopes. But what would casework look like with tools designed specifically for caseworkers to serve constituents? There is no one better to walk us through this than our first speaker. I am delighted to introduce Yuri Beckelman, Staff Director at the House Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. As we said, the Modernization Committee works to provide bipartisan recommendations to make Congress more effective, efficient, and transparent. Before coming to ModCom, Yuri served as Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Congressman Mark Takano. He's also the founder of the Congressional Maker Caucus and the Capitol Hill Maker Fair. So he has a long history of bringing technology and innovation to Congress. And I'm also delighted to say that he is the incoming Chief of Staff for Representative Maxwell Frost in Florida. Yuri, take it away.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm loving the opportunity to kind of discuss what we learned in the Modernization Committee, but to also take and apply that to the new job I'm going to. So please stay following the work that we do in the Office of Maxwell Frost. We're going to try to iterate a lot of the great work that we learned about from all of you. Just a quick little thing about the Modernization Committee. So we are the rare select committee that is totally bipartisan. We have 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats. All of our recommendations require at least 8 votes. So we have to have everyone on board. And when we start working on issues, our premise is not, here's a good idea. Our premise starts with, here is something that is broken. And we all agree that this is broken. Now let's try to figure out an answer for how to fix it. And so rather than being like, here's a piece of technology that would make caseworkers' work life so much better, we started with, well, what is broken in the systems and processes that you already use? And that's kind of how we look at all of the work that we do. And it's a lot of fun. You know, we're not just the IT department. We do everything from civility and collaboration to staff capacity training. And we've been around for 4 years now. We're wrapping up this year, but I was really proud of the work that we did on district office and casework, because it's so much about how we make our constituents feel that leave an impression that this is a good place that is working in their best interests. The work that you do as a caseworker is already about frustration with the government, frustration with access to services, frustration that they have to come to you to figure out how to get something that they either earned or are entitled to. And that's frustrating. You as a consumer have had this exact same experience. You show up at a business that told you that there was a 60-day return policy, and all of a sudden they're only 30 days. And it just feels unfair and frustrating. And oftentimes the process it is less about the outcome as much and more about the process you went through, that you got a fair shot, that you were treated fairly. And even if you didn't get the outcome, you understand why, and that so someone else in the same situation would understand why. So the technology that we use right now is lacking. It's built for other systems. It's built for responding to mass campaigns of mail. Our CRMs are adapting, but there are CRMs that specifically are built for working the process and flow of casework. I think you're starting to see some of our CRMs start taking into consideration more of those. But what I'm talking about, this unfair system, is that this feeling that, this famous saying that came up in our hearing, I think Toni Morrison said it, that people don't always remember what you did for them. They don't always remember what you said, but they always remember how you make them feel. And that's what you do as a caseworker. You make them feel that they were treated fairly, right? And with proper technology, prompt, concise, and well-explained communication, you have that in place, and your constituents feel like they were served properly and fairly. And systems that ensure your constituents are kept in the loop and are followed up on, that makes them feel like they're receiving proper service, and transparency along the way makes them feel that way. This is a fascinating, excellent, story that I like telling, and was part of so much of the way that we looked at technology and casework. You look at former models where people tried to build trust, and maybe I'm dating myself, but I definitely remember days when the idea of buying anything online seemed crazy and untrustworthy. And then it became, well, I want to order food, and how does that, I don't believe that's actually going to show up. It's just going to show up in someone's email. Maybe they'll check it 12 hours later, right? How do you build systems of trust? And one of the great examples of this was a staffer of mine used to use it a lot, but about the idea of a pizza tracker, of a live tracker of what is going on, so that people know where they are in the process, rather than having to email you and wait for you to respond. And you don't, as a staffer, don't necessarily want to respond because you don't have the information they want yet, right? Like, you're just trying to keep people in the loop so that they feel like they are being treated fairly. And that's what new systems and technology can do. Right now, I'm sure you are all frustrated with your Excel spreadsheets that copy into an email, that when someone says you never sent this, you have to search your email, and it's a messy, frustrating process, and it slows down the whole system. You make mistakes, and people feel it. New systems that already exist, new systems that are coming on board, it's all within one ecosystem. It's all there so that you do your intake through there, so that you have the form and you don't have to ask them for the form again. It creates checklists so that they know what they need to do before you can begin. It populates in the system. It populates anything past interactions. It populates who you need to reach out to follow up on the things they are asking for. It asks them the prompt questions about what they are seeking help with, and it helps them understand what services you provide before they get too far along. I'm sure many of you have gone through the opening process and got to somewhere where we just don't provide that service, and it just leaves a really bad taste, where someone's like, well, who do I go to then? Right? That's the scary, frustrating part. And if you can kind of set expectations early on through technology, that's great. A lot of what you do here is keeping on top of things as it goes through the system. And good technology will bump reminders to you. You don't have to set your own reminders. And it really removes a lot of this kind of the guesswork, and casework is a little bit process and a little bit magic, and it works better when it's a lot more process, right? It connects to the right people, and it attaches forms, and it keeps people aware of what you're doing. And this technology exists; it's already being built. And I think as someone who's wrapping up my time on the committee, as someone and moving into a personal office, I'm going to be just like you, and I'm going to be advocating for the adoption of tools like this. And I'm going to be talking to my CRM vendor and saying, this is what I expect, so that our casework is properly handled. And there's a lot of good opportunity here, but it's only going to come if you all demand it. So speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself. So I spent the last 2 years advocating for you, and I'm still going to be here, but now I'm one of you, so I'm advocating for myself as well. And I hope that's helpful, and we'll get some more questions later on.
So up next, so Yuri talked about some of the tools and the technologies and what's out there, what's coming to Congress, what's available in other sectors, and what that could look like. And next, we're going to dive deeper into one specific area where casework is poised for really dramatic change. And I think many of the caseworkers on this call who've been doing casework for the last few years have really lived this and seen this as an area where casework has to change. Where we are right now is not sustainable, and that is disaster casework. Disaster casework is really encapsulating all of the pitfalls of how we do casework today, but then also a lot of the potential of casework today and casework into the future. So I am so delighted to introduce Logan De La Barre Hayes. Logan is a senior legislative assistant to Congressman Garrett Graves in Louisiana. And some of the caseworkers on this call may have interacted with the Graves team in their own moment of crisis. Their team actually pays to send their own caseworkers out to other districts facing natural disasters, acting as a kind of expert referral and flex capacity for offices all over the country, which is an amazing service that they provide on their own initiative from their own MRA. And I know many offices have been so grateful. Their team is also behind legislation that would allow offices to bend the staff cap in a federally declared disaster, also a ModCom recommendation, and the Cases Act that many of you know for its impact on making federal agencies accept Digital Privacy Act release forms. Before her work with Rep. Graves, Logan was a speechwriter and a legislative assistant for Senator Kennedy and completed a joint MA-MSc at Columbia and the London School of Economics and International and World History. Logan, thank you so much for being here. Go ahead and take it away.
Hey there, folks. Thank y'all so much for, first of all, what you do, but also for y'all enabling us on the legislative side to kind of make these improvements and get better and be better. Working for the Louisiana delegation has been one of the great joys of my life. We really believe in public service here. And we have some awesome advantages to working for a state like ours. And the big pitfall is the predictability of which disasters strike. In my 6 years on the Hill, there have been two major there have been multiple major declared disasters that have hit my district. But two have sort of, I think, transformed not only the district and the communities we represent, but also the way my boss chooses to represent them. The first was in August 2016. It was just an unexpected rain bomb. It's about 36 inches of rain, and it put between 1 and 7 of our constituents out of, 1 in 7 of our constituents out on the streets, just completely flooded out their homes. And obviously, when you have a disaster, as you all know so well, you're interacting not only with FEMA, with the state and local government, but also with SBA. You're interacting potentially with HUD at some points. You've got a mass number of NGOs that step in. And people come to Congress, as Yuri pointed out, in their moment of desperation, trying to access the myriad federal resources that exist for them. And my boss had to look them, and our caseworkers had to look them in the face and go, well, where's your privacy release form? Like, we can't do anything for you in the absence of that piece of paper. And they're like, well, it's in my house that flooded, that doesn't have any electricity. And so that was a legitimate barrier. And it's not as if FEMA was walking around with stacks of PRFs to give to people. So, that limiting factor, my boss came back and was like, we have to solve this problem. And so we worked with the Committee on Modernization, we worked in House Administration to pass the Cases Act, which has really transformed the way our office has been able to view casework. And it led into not only a more efficient process, kind of federal government wide once it was adopted, but it also has changed the way we've interacted with our CRM. And when we were in the process of switching, one of the things that was most important to my boss was finding a CRM that was highly customizable, so that we could use our lived experiences to help better track casework and help our casework better inform our policy recommendations. But unfortunately, a highly customizable CRM really only works if you have either experience or a very innovative view of casework, because otherwise you kind of have to just learn it by doing. And that can unfortunately take some time. So obviously we love to participate in the conversations, even though we're not on the Committee on ModCom, of how we can be thinking about innovating these things. And we know that our CRM has definitely taken some of the things that started in our office to other offices. And so we love the ripple effect of our own innovation kind of working outward. But ultimately, like, a lot of offices are working in a silo. You're kind of living and learning as caseworkers in your own district and with your own problems. And then something like a disaster happens and you're kind of out there figuring it out. Which is why our office has our kind of innovative program where we do ship our caseworkers out when there's a disaster. And some disasters you have warning for. Like, we are really fortunate when Ida was coming, we were able to pivot. We flew down, or some of our DC team flew down to help our district team manage things, but a lot of us stayed. And we stayed here to operate as essentially a switchboard, because we knew we had reliable phone lines and we had reliable internet. And so we were up here taking in PRFs and directing people to the resources. And then, when somebody could get a hold of someone in the district, kind of working to triage and follow up on things. And that was possible because we had advance notice and because we had experience, which are not always something that's kind of granted in these major declared disasters or emergencies. And we're currently, one of our big priorities in this space is the Staffing to Aid in Faster Federal Emergency Response Act, which I hope we're going to get the green light to introduce next week, which would allow the Committee on House Administration with bipartisan consensus to bend the flex cap, the full-time equivalent staff, to allow people to bring on extra caseworkers for a period of up to 2 years. Because we know that these disasters, all the programs have different start and end dates. They all have overlapping requirements. You have to have experience with myriad federal agencies in order to kind of work through these problems. And that is long work. I mean, we are still working on 2016 casework in 2022. Periodically, I get PWs from Katrina that need reconciling. So, these obviously, like our Katrina caseload is not so high that we need a whole extra person to manage it, but it is really helpful to have that extra capacity in a time of need when you have all of your other casework burdens and you get something like a disaster added on top. Because as we know, your veterans casework, your Social Security casework, your passport cases, like none of those stop just because you had a disaster strike. So yeah, I'm really excited to continue to participate in this conversation. I think that there's so much that could be done to make Congress work like it was designed on purpose. And it really shouldn't take, a congressman walking around his destroyed district to realize that after a natural disaster, people don't have printers. But sometimes that's what it takes to get that question of like, how would this work if it was by magic? So thanks, Anne. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Logan. I love that framing of how would Congress work if it was designed from the beginning. I think that really gets at a lot of what we're covering today. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. Wonderful. So then, as Logan touched on, so one of the key unique features of casework is a lot of the ways that caseworkers develop that insight and that visibility into the ways that the legislative and executive branches connect. I really don't think there is anyone in government that has that same ground level, top level, executive, legislative visibility besides caseworkers. I mean, that is an incredible resource and an incredible type of expertise. And I think there's a ton of untapped potential there for how Congress can better tap into that expertise and bring that expertise and that insight and that deep experience into its the rest of the people's business. So there is no one better to discuss that than our next speaker, Tim Stratton, from the Director of Congressional Oversight at the Project on Government Oversight. If you're unfamiliar with POGO's fantastic oversight training, they provide training to congressional staff on how to better conduct oversight and investigations. Tim has testified several times before Congress on improving congressional oversight capacity, and he also previously worked for Senator Susan Collins doing oversight in the Senate Aging Committee. And I will say, Tim is also a dear friend of Casework World because he is also a former caseworker. So it's so exciting to see someone who started out there do such wonderful work to make Congress and legislation work better. So Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Anne, and welcome everybody. I'm excited to talk to you today about casework and oversight. You might be asking, how do those intersect? Well, first, it's important to note that consistently the Supreme Court has ruled that oversight is inherent to the legislative process. Congress can't legislate effectively without oversight, meaning Congress can't identify what new laws are needed without first identifying gaps that currently exist. In addition, Congress can't appropriate funds to agencies that they don't know how much they need or why they need it, or can't give consent to a nomination without doing the background. That's all our oversight process. And a lot of times, these new laws are triggered by casework, coming from the district, realizing problems that their constituents are facing. I've noticed that I think there's a misconception sometimes on the Hill that oversight can only be done at the committee level. Sure, it's certainly easier and most of it's done that way, but great oversight can and has been done by many personal offices. Just look at the thousands of pieces of legislation that are introduced every Congress, in each chamber. Those all started by identifying a need for either a new law to close some kind of gap. And most of the time, again, that does come from casework. As Anne mentioned, I started as a caseworker in Senator Collins' office. My old office really emphasized constituent services and casework. In fact, our state staff was actually almost just as large as our DC staff, which I think is usually pretty unusual You know, a lot of our casework, what you guys probably deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, constituents trying to access their Social Security benefits, VA benefits. They haven't had their, you know, they've applied for their passport. They haven't heard back in 3 months. And so, you know, you try to work for them and try to get, you know, those answers. But occasionally, well, when you do these cases, a lot of times they come across as very individual, you know, individually or specific, you know, cases. And while that's certainly true, the underlying issues that these, you know, facing each case is not unique oftentimes. For example, my boss was from Maine, so all our casework were Mainers. And just because someone in rural Maine is experiencing an issue accessing their VA benefits, chances are someone in another state such as California or Michigan is probably experiencing the same problem. So, you know, one, better tracking some of these cases can help identify patterns and potential fixes to really cut through that bureaucratic, you know, red tape. Seeing what issues are growing and becoming real problems that really Congress should address, you know, in a systematic way rather than one office, you know, at a time. In addition, just better tracking the types of cases that are coming up can and how they're resolved can better help train newer caseworkers to provide more timely resolutions to cases as they come up. I know when I was, you know, a new caseworker, I didn't know what I was doing. You know, it was a learning curve. And, you know, after a while doing certain cases, you understand like what, you know, the hiccup may be, but oftentimes you don't. So if you're able to like, you know, work with others and see what other trends and how people have navigated through that can really be helpful. And frankly, can get the constituents the service they need in a much quicker time period. But in terms of oversight too, you know, one example of how we really took a lot of our casework and made it an oversight priority. One of the issues I worked on a lot when I eventually went to the aging committee is we, for a long time, were starting to receive calls from constituents losing a lot of money through to phone scams and other, you know, just financial exploitation. And we noticed a huge trend on this, and we eventually reached out to the Government Accountability Office, asked, is this a unique thing to Maine? It's like, how prevalent is this? And ultimately, they told us, we think people are losing $3 billion a year. And so ultimately, my bosses, you know, was like, we need to do something about this. We made it one of our top priorities on the committee. We established a fraud hotline, and we were getting hundreds of calls every year from all 50 states, you know, learning that this is not a unique problem. And ultimately, we learned the government wasn't doing much about this. This was not on their radar. And we eventually would produce an annual report identifying the different scams. And ultimately, that led to, I think, about 25 different hearings we did in about a 6-year span. And we really put pressure on the government to make it a priority. And it was slow, but they eventually did. You know, and I think it was because of highlighting, you know, the trends we were seeing. It actually enacted some legislation, got a couple different bills across, you know, the line to the president's desk to really help crack down on these and really provide services. And that all started, you know, by casework. Something recently, or a couple of years ago too, there was a big issue where a veteran in the state had the police knock on their door in the middle of the night because the veterans or the VA health crisis line had received, you know, a call or a text message saying I needed help. Well, the VA had someone's old phone number who actually was not in Maine but was in Texas. Luckily, the police they were able to like work in, you know, with Texas authorities and get that veteran the help they needed very quickly. But you know, when the constituent contacted us saying, you know, a police officer showed up at my door, we realized that may not just be a unique thing. That could happen to anyone. And, you know, the VA should make sure that they have the tools they need to make sure if a veteran reaches out to them, they get the services that they need. So the office sent a letter to the VA highlighting this issue. And ultimately there was language put in, you know, that year into the appropriations bill and additional money to get them more resources. And the language actually, you know, encourage them to deploy technology similar to like 911 call centers that would have like geolocation. So even though that may sound like a one isolated case, by highlighting that, bringing it to the department's attention, and then also working legislatively in Congress, the office made sure that that wasn't going to happen again, or the chances of that happening again were very slim. So when constituents come to you and you work their cases, work with your DC staff to make them aware of these. Sometimes I think state staff and DC staff don't always communicate well, as much as they should, and highlighting issues that you're seeing on the ground in your state can lead to actual action in Congress, and frankly can be great legislative wins for your boss. So just remember, just because it may seem like an isolated case, there are 330 some odd million people in this country. I guarantee you those cases are not just one-offs. So really work with your DC staff, because they can really be good legislative wins. And I have more examples, but I know we're running. I don't want to go over my time, so happy to talk more later on. So thank you.
Tim, thank you so much. I can only imagine the very specific sense of caseworker panic, getting that phone call about the police showing up at a constituent's door. So thank you for bringing me back to casework days and for sharing how casework can lead into oversight and has led into oversight, which I think is really exciting in so many ways. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then last but not least, so all of our panelists have touched on the key to this vision is the caseworkers. The key to this vision is the people who make all of this possible, the conditions caseworkers work in, the professional training that they receive, the resources and the support that they receive, the availability of career paths to keep caseworker expertise in Congress like Tim, and then in para-congressional world also like Tim. So our next speaker, it can really dig into what will it take and what can it look like to build a Congress that really supports caseworkers and supports caseworkers in the work that they do. So I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Butts, who is the Director of Public Policy at the National Association of Social Workers. Sarah's work at NASW includes workforce advocacy, including just keeping track of the social workers and who work in many different settings, including Congress. There are a lot of social workers who work in casework and in other roles in the institution. She previously served as executive director of the Grand Challenges for Social Work at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. The Grand Challenge, sorting out Congress. Sarah, we need all the help we can get. And we've also been delighted to partner with Sarah in the past at the POPVOX Foundation on resources to support caseworkers, including our guide to what caseworkers can learn from social workers on district safety. We've been so grateful for her partnership and expertise. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's so awesome to be here. I want to open just by saying that indeed I am the Director of Public Policy of the National Association of Social Workers, and I am also a social worker. I hold a bachelor's in social work, also a master's in social work. I've also studied political science and public policy as part of my education. And so once you are trained as a social worker, you're always a social worker. We operate under many different titles. So I just want to acknowledge that. Sometimes we get kind of associated with only doing clinical work or being clinicians or being child welfare workers. I have had the experience of also being a child welfare worker. I'm here today to talk about the social work profession, our skills and training, and those skills and training which is applicable to congressional staff roles, including casework. And I'm hoping that in this discussion, I will surface some recommendations or ideas or plant some seeds around how we can recruit, retain, and better support caseworkers. And I really see this as an entry position to professional policy practice. So first, I want to emphasize that social workers are, as Anne said, often employed in congressional casework roles. We also hold policy positions on the Hill and in state legislatures. We are also elected lawmakers. There are 5 social workers in Congress and many in state legislatures. Myself, I was actually mentored by an individual who was a practiced casework for Senator Barbara Mikulski. So when you do policy practice in our profession, these are the individuals that mentor you. So we should think about a career continuum that starts post-graduation and goes, well into many other positions that could be in Congress or elsewhere. Social workers practice in many other settings in the community. I want to emphasize in the community. We're not just working in a clinical office providing psychotherapy, although some of us do that. We're trained to provide services in schools, in libraries, in hospitals, in courts, in child welfare, in juvenile justice systems. We're interacting with constituents every day in their communities, in their space. Those are our clients and our patients, okay? We're employed as caseworkers in some of these settings. So we are employed as caseworkers in district offices, in Congress, but we do this work elsewhere. So I'm going to try to kind of demystify what is a social work approach to try to really quickly give you a sense of our training and why it's applicable. We are trained in human behavior, in mental health and behavioral health, in assessment, in intervention, in risk assessment. We use an approach which is the person and environment framework. We deploy a strengths-based perspective, which means that we don't look at the deficits. We try to look at the strengths and start to build from there. We meet the clients where they are. So your interaction with the client, you figure out where that client is based on an assessment and you start there. We're skilled with de-escalating situations, skilled in problem solving, in navigating very complex systems, including government. We're often employed in government and in the nonprofit sector, particularly around social services systems. We're connecting clients and communities to services. We're trained to serve clients again in their communities. And we do this in home visiting, child welfare workers, child protective services, social workers who work in crisis response. We're trained to meet clients in their homes without co-responders, okay? So we do this work without police escort, although sometimes that's necessary. So we have extensive training in safety and that is applicable. We're also guided by a robust code of ethics that is the foundation of our practice. And some of those things that are core to our code, and I encourage you all to look at our code because lots of applicable kind of guidance here. The importance of human relationships, the dignity and worth of the person, integrity, competence, service. I see a lot of parallels. Really quickly, I want to say a little bit about our education because there's some opportunity here. Just as background, social workers are trained at the bachelor's, master's, DSW, and PhD levels in terms of higher education. In social work schools, there's both a clinical, and that's usually mental health, and what we call a macro concentration. And oftentimes social workers are dually trained. So I'm dually trained. The macro concentration is management, community organizing, practice, policy. Many social workers that run nonprofits and government, serving government leadership roles are indeed macro social workers. When I got out of grad school, for example, I worked for political appointees in the state of Maryland in the Social Services Administration. It's an entry-level job. Both these clinical and macro skills are applicable to casework and policy practice. The MSW is the terminal degree to practice social work. At that point, professional social workers have completed 2 years of field practicum experience in the community before graduating. Macro field practicum could be in a congressional or district office, including casework. So there are opportunities to host social work graduate students in casework positions as long as supervision is available. Ideally, these social workers would be hired upon completion of such an internship. So we already have a structure for this, and we already have social workers working in these positions. We could certainly expand upon this. This could be a specialized area of practice is what I'm getting to. So in closing, I want to just write with some recommendations here. There are transferable skills from the social work profession. Hiring social workers for casework and other policy positions can be valuable. It would be great if the MSW was recognized as one of the preferred degrees for some of these positions. Social work training can also be of value to social work policy and congressional staff and also casework staff. The profession has continuing education offerings, certificates, and training that can be provided and even tailored to support professional development for congressional caseworkers. Social work interns could be brought in and student units developed. Again, that's the entry point to a whole pipeline, a whole career. And by professionalizing casework and creating these pathways, we're really strengthening the workforce, okay? That's what a macro social worker like myself would expect. 15 years ago, when I came out of grad school, I've been able to kind of advance through my career, and now I'm a national policy director. Before closing my remarks, I just want to draw some parallels between the social work profession and what's happening with casework and some of the modernization efforts that have been discussed today. Social work is a majority female profession, and we're likely suffering from unresolved gender pay gap. We are often underpaid. We have low starting salaries in some settings, very high student loan debt. As I mentioned earlier, attainment of a master's degree is required for independent practice. So new social work graduate data from the Council on Social Work Education is showing that we are increasingly a racially diverse and socioeconomically diverse profession, which is a goal in many settings. And I'm sure it is a goal to hire a diverse group of staff in Congress and in district offices. And we're seeing that these social workers of color have higher student loan debt than their white colleagues or counterparts. So this means that we need to really consider increasing starting salaries for casework and other positions and help to support these individuals throughout their career continuum. So the same type of debates that are happening, some of the conversations you're having around paying interns and professionalizing, valuing the contributions of these staff, we're also having that in the social work profession.
Sarah, that's so exciting. And I think it's so wonderful to hear about just the potential for some of these more expanded continuing education opportunities and the kind of the very directed focus on ethics and on resilience and on support for the long haul and on recognizing the skills that could be transferable to a bunch of different roles in Congress and beyond. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for the insight in many different directions for what casework can look like in the next 10 years and beyond. I'm really struck by kind of the different levels that seem available for ways to push casework into the future. There are innovations from particular offices that can be adopted by other offices today with nothing else required. There are innovations in other fields that can be brought into casework that already exist. Again, the technology opportunities and the best practices from other fields. And then there are things that we will need to build wholesale that will be specific to Congress, and those might take longer. But there are just so many different ways that casework can change and is changing today with such an incredible horizon for where it can go in the future. So I think I hope I speak for many of the caseworkers and former caseworkers on this call with how exciting this discussion is. So at this point, I'd love to open it up for a discussion with our panelists. And again, caseworkers, folks in the audience, we do really want to hear from you on where are you seeing the future of casework go? So if you have questions for our panelists, if you have things you want to share that your office is doing, if you have a wish list for what you want to see that would help you innovate in your office, please feel free to drop all of that in the Q&A, and we'd love to get into that with you. But let me maybe start with Yuri. So one of the exciting things about ModComp's work is I think in many previous modernization efforts, it's been really tough to keep the district and keep casework front and center. So that was so exciting that ModCom really did center and focus on district stuff. So how do we, in future modernization work, whatever scope and whatever form that takes after the end of the select committee, how do we keep caseworkers? How do we keep district staff central to that effort?
I think some of it's kind of already becoming a reality. The CAO has professionalized staff training in recent years and done a really wonderful job at it that I'm just blown away. I've been working on the Hill since 2006, and the stuff that was coming into place are the things that when I started out on the Hill, I never believed would be something we'd have, because it's too nice. It's too nice for us people, for us people on the Hill. Not only do they have casework classes and courses, they are also doing annual fly-ins for caseworkers to come spend time in DC. I think you're going to see more and more of a presence of caseworkers, both training and networking in DC and learning best practices from each other. I think there is going to be a point when we really drill down and focus on casework as one of the technology tools that needs to be built by the newly launched House Digital Service. I think that's going to happen, and I think it's going to be very front and center. Additionally, one of the more recent recommendations that we saw implemented was the use of MRA funds for certificate programs at universities. I have been having multiple conversations with folks about what those would look like, whether it's legislative drafting or project management for software development in government. Here's a great idea. Why wouldn't you be doing congressional casework as a certificate program at GW? It just doesn't make sense why that wouldn't exist. And it will, and it's going to professionalize the field. Additionally, I just want to hammer, to the last speaker, but pay is going up. It's going up across the board. And I think, but it's not just pay. It's also this, when I talk about professionalization, there is a re-emphasis on management, and your chiefs of staff and your legislative directors and your district directors, not just being the best political minds, but also being the best managers and using the resources they have to ensure that these people, your staff and caseworkers, which is a specialized talent, are both paid, trained, rewarded, encouraged to grow in their field. And so I think you're going to see a pretty large shift in that. And I'm very excited for it, very, very excited for it. Additionally, the last thing I'll hammer is we spent this whole segment on civility and collaboration, and one of the big portions of it, what really drives members, why are they excited to have this job? What gets them up and day? And I say, I like to say that they literally hang it on the walls in their office. They tell you what it is. It's there's pictures of them with celebrities, which I have no influence over. I can't get you a photo with Taylor Swift, but it's stuff they did for people in the district, and it's bills they signed into law. And this is one of the three legs, is things that they did for people in their district that was meaningful, that they think about, and that is the work that's being done by the caseworkers that leads to those stories. So that's one of the three legs that at the end of the day, members care enough about to hang on their walls.
Yuri, that's fantastic. I really appreciate that. And you're right, absolutely right to point out just the incredible strides that have been made, and the incredible resources that are available. So if you missed any of those that Yuri went through and you're interested in hearing more, flag it for us in the chat. We'll be happy to.
Let me just, if I could just double click on that, as the chairman likes to say really quickly. I'm going to an office where our pay floor is $55,000. And that's not enough for caseworkers. It's going to be higher than that, but you're seeing across the board pay increases. And that's as a freshman office before we have our full budget. I think that you're going to see the real value for people who stick around longer, that we've always wanted people to stick around, but we just couldn't do it. We just didn't have the resources. And now that we do, we still have offices that are based in this old mentality of pay what we think we can get away with rather than what we think people are worth. But we're getting away from that. We're becoming better. And your managers need to start thinking about paying people what they are worth, not just what they can get away with.
I could not agree more. And Yuri, thank you. Thank you for flagging that. Absolutely an area that we need to see a lot of continued advocacy, again, for caseworkers to be recognized for the incredible expertise that they have and then compensated accordingly. And speaking, that brings up an interesting question, which is just how do management and congressional office kind of see caseworkers and see casework as something that's worth devoting resources to? So Logan, I wonder if I could come back to you. Really struck, and I suspect a lot of the caseworkers on the call are, in hearing about how it sounds like your DC team is trained up to be able to immediately jump in on casework. And I think I think you have a lot of jealous caseworkers that your DC team is so excited that they are willing to jump in and do casework when they have to. So if you were a caseworker who's like, my DC team would never do this, do you have advice for those caseworkers on how to build that relationship with your DC team to kind of have some shared casework priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just like, this is the most boring answer in the world, but it's like garden variety relationship building, honestly. Right before I was on this call, I had a phone call with one of my counterparts in the district who had kind of a wonky, financial services related question. Like, someone made a bad investment and he didn't know where to send them. And he wanted to know if like his gut was in the right place. And I really try to encourage, especially since becoming legislative director, my Baton Rouge team and my Thibodeau team to feel like they can call me and ask me, like, no question is too dumb. And that is really important, not because I think any questions are dumb, but I think there's this barrier where it's like, oh, we're in session, I don't want to bother the DC team, I should be able to find out the answer to this. And honestly, a lot of the time, it's a great question. And those questions are ultimately what leads to the problem solving mindset. And I was really moved by some of what Tim talked about, because I think that's been our lived experience. I mean, after Hurricane Ida, we weren't hearing about digital PRFs anymore because those were solved. But we were hearing that people could not get a hold of FEMA and that disasterassistance.gov was crashing. And people were spending hours standing in their front yard, plugged into a generator, trying to get cell service, trying to get on the phone with FEMA, who contracts out with call centers to like intake calls, and people on the phone were just being like, well, the application's online, go to disasterassistance.gov and hanging up. And, you know, my boss sits on transportation infrastructure, and there's a subcommittee that oversees FEMA. And so we made it a point when we had the FEMA administrator in front of us to be like, why don't you have better oversight over your call centers? Like, why is this acceptable? Like, people should be able to call a line, get a human being who can help them solve their problem. If, you know, the website crashes and now they can't submit an application because it's been duplicated because there's already an application open to that social security number with no information in it. And I would not know that that was going on if my caseworkers weren't telling me. And so I can't draft a question for a hearing, or I can't draft a letter if there's not open communication. And sometimes I think people rely on the member to like make that jump, or rely on their district director, but like, you just really can't oversell the value of having a one-on-one relationship with your policy counterpart in the district. And not everything has a policy solution, but I think staying problem solving oriented, and that's our motto, right? Like, we're public servants and we're here to fix problems. And sometimes it's like a tiny iterative process where like, today it's a letter, tomorrow it's a question at a hearing, and 6 months from now it's a bill. But you have to take that like first great step for the problem, and just kind of trusting in and staying on top of your district and of your legislative counterpart is a really great thing. I love numbers too. I'll like end my plug there, but you know, sometimes it's one person, and it's one person with a really unique problem. But sometimes my caseworker is like, yo, I've got like 40 people who are coming to me with this problem. And that's a huge flag for me, because I'm like, if there are 40 people in Baton Rouge or 40 people in the Bayou with this issue, there are millions across the country, or hundreds of thousands, or 10,000. You know, we can work here to build a caucus around this issue. But it starts with identifying that this isn't a one-off problem.
And can I actually just piggyback off that really quick?
Yeah, please.
Because I think what Logan said was really spot on that. I think especially, you know, there's different types, you know, the session calendar, especially the beginning of the year, like when you have all the, you know, secretaries that come in for their annual like POPs, you know, meetings. Anytime, or it doesn't even have to be an appropriations hearing, any hearing that, you know, some kind of principal or decision maker is going to be testifying. And if your boss is on that committee, I think that's just a great opportunity for the DC staff to really reach out to the state and district offices and saying, you know, the secretary will be appearing before the hearing, you know, next week. Are there any issues, you know, that you guys are seeing on the ground? Because again, caseworkers, you are the eyes and ears in the face of, you know, your boss to the constituents. What are you seeing that I can address directly to a decision maker? And so just having that like constant communication, looking for opportunities to raise those specific issues, because like Logan said, it doesn't have to be a legislative, you know, fix by any means, but sometimes just asking, you know, a very, you know, pointed question to, you know, the secretary of, you know, whatever department, you know, can just be enough. And again, that's something that your boss can then, you know, highlight, you know, through, you know, comms to say, yes, we're working for you. We understand these are issues that you guys are seeing, and we are actually, you know, working to address those.
That's wonderful. And I think one of the barriers maybe for caseworkers in feeling like they're kind of confident enough to take that step and bring those things to their bosses and say, hey, you know, tell me when there's an opportunity, because I want to contribute what I know from casework, is maybe the legislative process and the oversight process can seem very formalized. It seems like the only thing that we can do is, you know, draft a piece of legislation. I certainly ran into this when I was a caseworker, when I thought the only thing that I can ask for that's really going to change things structurally is like, I need my boss to write a bill. So maybe if I can open it to all of our panelists, are there tools that you think, are there tools or the resources that you think caseworkers should be leaning on more to understand the full scope of the toolkit available to offices on oversight and on fixing those constituent problems at a large scale? Logan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just got so excited about this question because we had a very pronounced issue in our district, disaster related. Obviously, I'm on my soapbox, where, you know, we wrote a provision of law that got signed, it got passed, and we thought it fixed a problem for 5,000 constituents. And when it came to be implemented, there were about 1,800 people who were left out by the way that, you know, the agency wrote the rule. And that can really happen. I mean, there's a lot of room in any bill for interpretation by the agencies. And I'm still working to close the gap on all of those people, but it was actually my district director who was able, through working with the caseworking with his counterparts at the agency, who were able to get them to write enough exceptions to the rule and the way that they implemented to close the gap for like a couple of thousand people. And we do tend to think that like you have to get something signed into law to fix it, but you can really work with an agency to adjust the implementation. And trust me, like y'all are caseworkers, you know, if there's an edge case, like you're going to find it. They're going to live on a block in your district and they're going to call you. And so realizing that like you don't have to pass a law to fix the edge cases, but you do have to have enough impetus in your own office to get in front of the person at the agency who could like maybe make that tweak for you. And then obviously when you run into the wall, that's when you kind of turn to the legislation. But there's so much you can get done just through talking to the agency and finding out where the wiggle room in the law is and getting them to kind of bump it out for you, because there often is.
That is such a good point. I wanted to make sure that we turn to one of the questions that we got in the chat, because I think this is such a good question, and it also speaks to one of the challenges with caseworkers being able to work within the institution to modernize. So we had somebody ask, how can state staff become involved in the conversation of furthering modernization and helping develop the technology from boots on the ground experience? And we also have a couple of other questions about what tech is available and just who is the right person to bring questions to. So Yuri, maybe can I turn back to you for the last question? You've really been in the weeds with the institutions in Congress that do support caseworkers. Where should caseworkers start to bring those meta observations?
Yeah. I would say that there's a couple of options. There is someone there who wants to hear, but they are a small organization, the House Digital Service, and there is a field of technology design that has nothing to do with coding, and it is called design thinking, and it's process driven. And I think that it's valuable for people to get together and do a beginning to end process evaluation of how you intake, how you talk to, how you go through the steps together. You all agree that these are the steps that exist, and discuss frustrations with each of those steps and come to some consensus on what an improvement to that process would look like. And so rather than saying this is just terrible, it doesn't work, coming with these are 3 design elements that we would like to see changed in the way that this process works. I spent a lot of time creating a spreadsheet for all of the contact information, or I spent a lot of time just writing emails over and over again to the same people, or I've spent a lot of time following up, and I'm spending all my time looking through. If you come up with those pain points, you are then able to advocate for fixing those specific pain points. And the people to talk to, there's a couple of sets. One is the House Digital Service, but they are a longer term play, but also as your vendor. You absolutely have the right to make a request or a demand that they make alterations to the product that they are offering to you at a very high premium to better serve you as a customer. They want it. They don't chase everything because they don't believe that it's going to be applicable to everyone in the field. And if you can bring together people that all agree that this is a pain point that if fixed, they would have a competitive advantage against other offices by fixing it, they're going to do it. I've done it many times. I convinced Eventbrite and IQ to hook up, and you could export from Eventbrite directly. It was like directly ported inside so that you didn't have to download a spreadsheet and upload it. It just automatically said this person showed up to this event. They can code and develop this stuff, and you're paying them to do it. So you should, but you got to have a clear sense of what it is you want before you go to them, is my opinion. And I would say also, you also have the right to ask for a demo of some of the software that exists in the private sector. And I'll be straight up with you, it will not one-to-one apply to the job that you have. You have a unique job, but it is not so unique that there are not lessons learned that can be learned from people who do this in other fields. And if you just Google casework, case management, casework software, there's like 17 options or something like that. And just go to their general inquiry line and say, hey, I'd like to see a demo of this. And many of them will happily show you a demo. That is how most technology makes its first steps onto the hill, by someone like me or someone like Ann, literally just saying, I think this is kind of cool. I wonder if there's an application for the hill, and asking for a demo, and someone gets back to you. So it's lots of opportunities to do that.
Definitely. Yuri, thank you so much. And folks, we are at time. I do want to just close in saying I'm so struck by, it's just if we can bring even a tiny fraction of the dedication and the advocacy and the just absolute like pit bull not dropping a problem ever that caseworkers and the legislative staff who work with them bring to their casework every day to do casework itself, there's no ceiling to what casework will look like in 10 years. And this has been such an exciting conversation. So thank you so much again to our panelists for joining to share their expertise. If you are like me and you feel that we could easily do another several hours on the future of casework, I'm also really excited to just, this is a tease, this is not the full announcement that is coming in January, but I do want to flag for folks that for the POPVOX Foundation, we are planning to launch in the 118th Congress, a program that we're calling the Casework Navigator Program. That will be a structured year-long subscription-based professional development program to provide more training and resources for casework teams to do some of the advocacy for themselves that we've talked about today. You can read more and browse our other casework resources at popvox.org/navigator, and signups for that will open in January. So hopefully we can keep this conversation going far into the future. In the meantime, you are also going to receive a short survey from us after this event. If we didn't get to your question, or if there's something else that you want to ask, if there are other resources that would be helpful for you, please go ahead and fill that out for us and let us know. And we will do everything we can to get you an answer, figure out how we're going to make that happen. With that, thank you all so much again for taking the time to join us, and have a great weekend and a safe holiday season. Thank you so much, everyone.